Can you kill your own son? Not in a fit of rage, not by accident, but cold, calculated, pulling the trigger twice, straight to the chest. Marvin Gaye wasn't just any son. He was a global icon, the voice behind What's Going On, a legend. But on April 1st, 1984, in Los Angeles, California, his father didn't see a legend. He saw a target, shot, dead, by the man who raised him. Why? Was it hate, jealousy, or something darker, buried deep within the walls of a broken home? This isn't just a murder. It's the unraveling of a family, the fall of a king, killed by the very man who crowned him. The final moments before Marvin Gaye's death remain etched in the memories of those who witnessed it and continue to stir the emotions of those who hear about it. On the morning of April 1st, 1984, in Los Angeles, California, the unthinkable occurred. The soul legend, whose voice had touched millions, was fatally shot by his father, Marvin Gaye Sr., in a domestic altercation. This chapter focuses on the harrowing moments leading up to the fatal shot, the anger, the tension, the environment, and ultimately, the irreversible act that shattered a family and shocked the world. Marvin Gaye, a man who had reached the peak of musical success, had come home to live with his parents in the wake of struggles with substance abuse, financial issues, and strained relationships. His mother, Alberta Gaye, had been the long-standing matriarch of the Gaye family, while his father, Marvin Gaye Sr., was a complex and volatile figure. Their relationship had always been one of tension, with deep-rooted resentment simmering between father and son. Marvin Gaye had sought peace and reconciliation, but it was clear that the unresolved issues from years of neglect, verbal abuse, and emotional trauma were never going to be easily buried. On that fateful day in Los Angeles, the atmosphere inside the Gaye household was charged with an air of hostility. A confrontation had been brewing for some time, fueled by old grievances, financial problems, and a lifetime of unresolved conflict. The tension had escalated over the past few days. Marvin Gaye had been staying at the family home in the West Adams neighborhood, and his relationship with his father had grown increasingly strained. It wasn't the first time that the two had exchanged harsh words. It wasn't even the first time that things had gotten physical between them. But on this day, something shifted, and what had been simmering for so long boiled over. The confrontation began in the early hours of the morning. According to reports from witnesses, the altercation started with a verbal disagreement. The two men exchanged heated words. Marvin Gaye Sr., who had been drinking heavily, was angry about Marvin Gaye's lifestyle and the money he had been sending to his mother, Alberta. Marvin Gaye, on the other hand, was frustrated with his father's constant criticism and control over his life. The two men argued in the hallway of the home, with their voices growing louder. The argument escalated quickly, and according to some reports, Marvin Gaye had tried to walk away, possibly attempting to defuse the situation. But the anger was too great, and Marvin Gaye Sr. was far too enraged. It was at this moment that the tragic end would come. In the midst of the confrontation, Marvin Gaye Sr. allegedly retrieved a handgun, a weapon he had kept in the home for protection, though some accounts suggest that Marvin Gaye Sr. had long harbored a deep-seated anger toward his son. The situation grew more intense as Marvin Gaye attempted to flee the confrontation, but the father, in a fit of rage, aimed and fired the fatal shot. Witnesses say that Marvin Gaye crumpled to the floor after the bullet struck him in the chest. He was rushed to the hospital, but despite attempts to save him, Marvin Gaye was pronounced dead on arrival. He was just 44 years old, and his death was not only the loss of a musical legend, but also the violent end to a relationship marked by decades of unresolved issues. The scene itself was chaotic and filled with confusion. Marvin Gaye Sr. immediately called the police after the shooting, and law enforcement arrived to find the elder Gaye sitting in the living room, disoriented and claiming that the incident had been a tragic accident. But the facts that followed would tell a different story, one that led to an investigation, a trial, and years of anguish for the family. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, there was no denying that the act was an explosion of years of pent-up frustration and rage. The suddenness of it left no room for resolution or reconciliation, and the finality of the shot forever altered the lives of those involved. The death of Marvin Gaye would later be ruled a homicide, with his father charged with voluntary manslaughter. The loss of the iconic singer left fans and the world in shock, but for those closest to him, it marked the end of a long, painful saga. There were many questions that lingered in the aftermath. Was this a deliberate act of malice, or was it a tragic culmination of a deeply broken family? If stories like this make you question everything you thought you knew about fame, family, and human nature, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to the channel for more true crime stories that don't just tell you what happened, they make you feel it. Hit the bell icon so you never miss the dark truths hiding behind the headlines. The events leading up to Marvin Gaye's tragic death were not sudden. They were the inevitable outcome of years of simmering tension within the Gaye household in Los Angeles, California. Before the fatal bullet would be fired, there were countless signs of a conflict that had been brewing for years: personal grievances, financial strain, and fractured family dynamics. In this chapter, we will explore the moments and hours that led to the catastrophic breakdown between Marvin Gaye and his father, Marvin Gaye Sr. What happened inside the Gaye home? What tensions had been rising? And what were the unspoken signs that something violent was on the horizon? The question that remains unanswered for many is, was this always going to end in tragedy, or was there a turning point where things could have been diffused? In the days preceding the fatal altercation, the Gaye family had been experiencing a turbulent period. Marvin Gaye, whose career had been full of highs and lows, had been staying at his parents' home in West Adams, Los Angeles. After years of struggles with addiction, financial troubles, and emotional turmoil, Marvin sought refuge with his parents in the place he had once called home. His return was not just a sign of reconciliation, but also one of desperation. In the hours before his death, the family dynamics were already tense. Marvin Gaye Sr., a man known for his volatile personality and controlling nature, had grown increasingly irritated with his son's presence at home. Marvin Gaye Sr. had spent much of his life struggling with his own demons, which included his own unresolved anger and a deep resentment toward his son's success. This bitterness often manifested in harsh words and criticism, causing friction between father and son. On that particular morning, the tension was palpable. According to some reports, Marvin Gaye Sr. had begun to drink earlier in the day, which only escalated the mood in the house. While it was not unusual for him to drink on this day, the alcohol appeared to have ignited his temper in a way that could not be subdued. Marvin Gaye, who had been previously struggling with his own addiction issues, tried to avoid confrontation as best he could, yet the weight of the years of familial conflict was too much for him to ignore. The exact nature of the argument that began that morning remains unclear. Some sources suggest that the disagreement had to do with Marvin Gaye's finances and his decision to send money to his mother, Alberta, instead of contributing more directly to the household. Others say that Marvin Gaye was attempting to defend his lifestyle choices, perhaps trying to explain his personal and professional struggles to a father who had never quite understood him. What is clear, however, is that the conversation rapidly escalated into a heated exchange. Both father and son exchanged harsh words, with Marvin Gaye Sr. accusing his son of being irresponsible and wasteful, while Marvin Gaye attempted to argue that he was doing what he could to take care of his family. As the day wore on, the tension in the house only intensified. The physical and verbal confrontations between father and son had become routine over the years, but on this day, they reached a tipping point. The emotional weight of their relationship, marred by years of resentment, disappointment, and unresolved issues, created an atmosphere of impending doom. Marvin Gaye's attempt to escape the escalating confrontation by retreating to his room was seen as an attempt to avoid a blow-up, but it only gave rise to further tension. In these moments, the unspoken language between them, the bitter glares, the raised voices, the clenched fists, hinted that something horrible was about to unfold. Marvin Gaye Sr., seething with anger, could no longer hold back his frustration. The father's anger had always been unpredictable, but on this day, it reached a violent peak. According to some accounts, Marvin Gaye Sr. was heard shouting, "I'm going to teach you a lesson you'll never forget." At this point, the mood in the house was charged with the sense of a final confrontation. Marvin Gaye Sr., whose patience had already worn thin, finally made the decision to retrieve a handgun from his room. In the family's house, the presence of firearms was not uncommon, and Marvin Gaye Sr. had often carried a weapon. The sight of the handgun seemed almost inevitable given the rage and tension that had accumulated. It was as if the weapon had been waiting to be drawn, a tragic prop in the drama that had been playing out for years. Despite Marvin Gaye's attempts to defuse the situation, the conflict reached its tragic climax. The gunshot that would take his life was the culmination of a long history of unresolved emotions, anger, and years of neglect within the Gaye family. Marvin Gaye, who had tried to walk away from the confrontation, would not have the chance to escape. In a moment of explosive violence, Marvin Gaye Sr. fired the fatal shot. The death of Marvin Gaye, shot by his own father, sent shockwaves far beyond the immediate family. It was a tragedy that no one could have predicted, yet it seemed somehow inevitable after years of unresolved conflict. The news of Marvin's death was met with a whirlwind of disbelief, shock, and sorrow from family members, friends, and the wider public. The real human pain, interspersed with confusion, denial, and the deep emotional reactions of those who loved him, painted a picture of a world left in turmoil after the loss of an icon. In this chapter, we will examine the aftermath of that fateful day, exploring the varied and conflicting emotions experienced by those closest to Marvin Gaye as they processed the news of his death. The first phone call came to Marvin Gaye's siblings. His brother, Frankie Gaye, would later recount how he received the devastating news from a family member, and it felt almost surreal. The shocking nature of the death left them scrambling to grasp the reality of the situation. Frankie would later tell reporters that when he first heard the news, it didn't seem real. He thought it might be a mistake, a misunderstanding, some cruel joke, but soon, it became apparent that this was no fabrication. The initial reaction from many of Marvin's loved ones was one of disbelief. The idea of Marvin Gaye being gone, taken so abruptly by his own father, was almost impossible to fathom. Marvin had always been known for his larger-than-life persona, his music, his charisma. He had been a towering figure in the world of Motown, his smooth voice and complex character earning him legions of devoted fans. To have his life ended so violently, in the home where he grew up, by the hands of the very person who had once been his protector, was beyond comprehension. The news quickly spread to the broader circle of Marvin's friends and colleagues, who also struggled to accept the reality of the situation. For many in the music industry, the loss was not just the death of a man, but the end of an era. Marvin Gaye's music had shaped the soundscape of the 1970s and early 1980s. His album What's Going On had become an anthem for social change, while Sexual Healing had brought him back into the limelight after a period of personal struggles. To lose him so suddenly left many feeling numb, as if the world had lost one of its most important voices. But the shock of his death was not confined to the music world. His family, particularly his mother, Alberta Gaye, was devastated by the loss. Alberta, who had raised Marvin and his siblings, had endured many difficult moments with her son, including his struggles with addiction and his emotional battles. Yet she had always been there for him, providing unwavering support even when things seemed bleak. Marvin's sudden and violent death hit Alberta especially hard. The fact that her husband, Marvin Gaye Sr., had been the one to pull the trigger made the grief even more complex. For Alberta, the pain was twofold: the loss of her son and the betrayal by her husband. According to some sources, Alberta initially refused to believe that her husband could have committed such an act. The idea of Marvin Gaye Sr. killing his son was something she could not reconcile with the man she had lived with for decades. She, like others in the family, went through stages of denial, attempting to find some explanation that would make sense of the situation. The questions continued to haunt her. What had pushed Marvin Gaye Sr. to this point? Was there a moment that could have prevented this tragedy? Could anything have been done differently? Friends of Marvin Gaye also struggled with these questions. Some had witnessed the strained relationship between father and son, but none had predicted that it would end in violence. For many, it seemed as though Marvin was beginning to rebuild his life, making efforts to reconcile with his family, and yet the conflict between him and his father had clearly not been resolved. Was the death a culmination of years of unresolved issues, or was it a tragic outburst that could have been avoided? The questions lingered, but the answers remained elusive. Meanwhile, Marvin Gaye Sr., the man responsible for his son's death, was arrested and later charged with voluntary manslaughter. His reaction to the shooting was puzzling to many. Some reports suggested that he was immediately remorseful, while others indicated that he showed little emotion in the aftermath of the tragedy. His actions in the hours following the shooting seemed contradictory, adding to the confusion surrounding the entire situation. Marvin Gaye Sr. reportedly did not immediately show signs of understanding the gravity of his actions. In the days following the shooting, he would offer inconsistent statements, further complicating the public's understanding of what had led him to kill his son. In the weeks and months that followed, the family was forced to grapple with the loss of Marvin Gaye, trying to make sense of a life that had been taken too soon. For many, the shock of his death would evolve into a deeper sense of sorrow, and the loss would leave a permanent void in their lives. The sense of injustice surrounding the way Marvin had died, at the hands of his own father, made the tragedy even more difficult to bear. The real human sorrow was not just about the loss of a beloved family member, but the sense of betrayal and pain that came from the way his life was taken. If you think this was intense, you've only scratched the surface. Subscribe now, because the truth doesn't wait, and neither do we. No sugarcoating, no filters, just the raw, brutal reality of true crime. Hit that button. Stay curious. Stay disturbed. The death of Marvin Gaye at the hands of his father immediately raised more questions than it answered. While the event was officially deemed a case of voluntary manslaughter, the aftermath left behind a trail of suspicions, ambiguities, and theories that continue to provoke discussions to this day. Was it really a murder? Or was there more to the story than meets the eye? Was this a tragic culmination of a long history of family conflict? Or could there have been underlying motives or hidden anger that pushed Marvin Gaye Sr. to his breaking point? In this aspect, we will move into the mysterious elements surrounding the killing, exploring the potential hidden truths and examining whether the events leading up to Marvin's death were as straightforward as they seemed. We will analyze the circumstances, the personalities involved, and the critical moments leading to that fateful day. Were there factors at play that had not yet been fully uncovered, or was the truth simply too hard to face? And, more importantly, how did the investigation and the subsequent trial influence the perception of this tragedy? To understand the complexity of the situation, one must first examine the fraught history between Marvin Gaye and his father. Marvin Gaye Sr. The two had a tumultuous relationship that had been marked by verbal and physical altercations, with the father often being abusive and overbearing. Marvin Gaye Sr., a preacher, had been a strict disciplinarian and had frequently imposed his will on Marvin. Over the years, the emotional toll on Marvin was evident, as he struggled to break free from his father's shadow. But despite these conflicts, there had been periods of reconciliation, and Marvin Gaye had returned to live with his father in the early 1980s, hoping to mend their relationship. This period of cohabitation, however, was anything but peaceful. Marvin Gaye Sr. reportedly grew angry and resentful of Marvin's success and the lavish lifestyle that came with it. The tension between them grew as the elder Gaye saw his son becoming more independent, while still under his roof. By the time the shooting occurred, their relationship had deteriorated to a breaking point. But was this just the tragic conclusion to a father-son saga of abuse, or was there something more hidden beneath the surface? According to some reports, Marvin Gaye Sr. had expressed deep feelings of bitterness toward his son, particularly regarding the amount of money Marvin had made in his music career. He reportedly felt that Marvin owed him more, due to the sacrifices he had made for his son's success. Was this resentment part of the motive behind the killing? Could Marvin's father have been driven by an overwhelming sense of entitlement, or was there another factor at play? The moment of the shooting. On the day of the shooting, Marvin Gaye Sr. and his son had an argument. Marvin had allegedly intervened in a dispute between his parents, which escalated the tension in the house. Some sources claim that Marvin had become upset with his father's controlling behavior and had told him to stop being so domineering. Whether or not this confrontation directly led to the violence remains unclear, but the altercation quickly turned deadly. The conflicting accounts of the shooting left many people wondering, what truly happened in those final moments between father and son? Could Marvin Gaye Sr. have been pushed to the edge by years of anger and resentment, or was there something more insidious at play? The investigation into Marvin Gaye's death was swift, but the official narrative remained clouded with doubt. Authorities initially accepted Marvin Gaye Sr.'s claim that the shooting had been accidental. He was arrested and charged with voluntary manslaughter, and a trial followed in the months after the incident. However, many were skeptical of the official version of events. Some questioned the proximity of the shots, which suggested that Marvin had not been in a position to lunge at his father as he had allegedly claimed. Others pointed to the fact that Marvin Gaye Sr. had previously been involved in violent incidents, including a history of abuse towards his family members. Could this pattern of violence have contributed to the tragic end of Marvin's life? Had Marvin Gaye Sr. finally crossed a line that he had previously only threatened to cross? Despite the suspicions, the trial ended with Marvin Gaye Sr. being sentenced to 6 years of probation, rather than prison time. The verdict raised additional questions about the justice system's handling of the case. Was this a fair sentence for a man who had killed his own son, or was there a hidden agenda behind the leniency? The decision sparked debates about the influence of fame, wealth, and family connections on the outcome of legal proceedings. As the years have passed, the mystery surrounding Marvin Gaye's death has continued to linger. Was this truly an accident, or was there more to the story than was ever revealed? What role did unresolved family trauma play in the killing? Was Marvin Gaye Sr. the victim of his own emotional turmoil, or was he a cold-blooded murderer? These questions remain unanswered, leaving many to speculate about the true nature of Marvin Gaye's death. As new details continue to emerge, the possibility of new revelations remains, ensuring that this tragic event will continue to intrigue and haunt those who reflect on it. In the immediate aftermath of Marvin Gaye's death, the world seemed to pause. The news rippled across the United States and beyond, leaving fans, friends, and family grappling with a reality that felt almost surreal. Marvin wasn't just an artist. He was a voice of a generation, and his sudden absence created a void that words struggled to fill. The Gaye family was thrust into an emotional storm. Marvin's mother, Alberta Gaye, faced the unimaginable, losing a son at the hands of her own husband. She reportedly sank into profound grief, her health deteriorating rapidly after Marvin's death. Alberta's sorrow was compounded by the complex emotions tied to the fact that her husband, Marvin Gaye Sr., was both the killer and the man she'd shared her life with for decades. Marvin's siblings were equally devastated. Each had their own memories of Marvin, the brother who'd once been a playful, ambitious boy in Washington, D.C., now gone in such a tragic way. The family dynamic, already strained, fractured further as they navigated public scrutiny and personal loss. The community response was overwhelming. Fans held vigils, played his records in tribute, and flooded radio stations with requests for his songs. Cities across the U.S., particularly in Michigan and California, saw spontaneous gatherings where people celebrated his life and mourned his passing. The question lingered in the air. How could such a beloved figure meet such a tragic end? For Marvin's close friends and collaborators in the music industry, the loss was both personal and professional. Motown founder Berry Gordy described Marvin as the truest artist I've ever known. The gap left in the music world was palpable. His death sparked conversations about mental health, familial conflict, and the hidden struggles even the most successful individuals face. Controversial questions emerged. Could anyone have intervened to prevent this tragedy? Did the pressures of fame and family expectations create an environment where such violence became inevitable? As years passed, Marvin's legacy grew even stronger. His music remained timeless, his influence undeniable. Tributes poured in from artists inspired by his work, and new generations discovered his genius. However, for those who knew him personally, the grief never fully faded. It simply became part of the narrative of his extraordinary, yet tragically short life. The tragic death of Marvin Gaye was more than just a heartbreaking event for the music world. It became a focal point of legal scrutiny. The investigation that followed sought to uncover the complexities behind the fatal shooting, unraveling layers of family conflict, psychological struggles, and unanswered questions that still provoke debate today. When authorities arrived at the Gaye residence on Gramercy Place in Los Angeles, California, the scene was both surreal and somber. Marvin Gaye Sr. was found sitting calmly on the front porch, the weapon, a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson pistol, already handed over to law enforcement. The initial police reports painted a grim picture. A domestic dispute escalating into fatal violence. But was it that simple? Gathering the evidence, investigators meticulously examined the scene. The trajectory of the bullets, the positioning of Marvin's body in his bedroom, and the proximity of the weapon all played crucial roles in piecing together the sequence of events. Forensic analysis confirmed that Marvin Gaye Sr. had fired 2 shots, one of which proved fatal, piercing Marvin's chest and damaging his heart. The pistol, notably, was a gift from Marvin Gaye to his father, a chilling detail that added another layer of complexity to the case. Why would a son give a firearm to a father with whom he had a volatile relationship? Was this an act of trust, oblivious to the underlying tensions, or a tragic oversight? The psychological assessment. Authorities delved into the psychological dynamics within the Gaye household. Interviews with family members, friends, and neighbors revealed a history of tension between Marvin and his father, rooted in strict religious upbringing, control issues, and Marvin Sr.'s reported abusive behavior. Yet, despite this, no prior incidents had escalated to physical violence of this magnitude. Marvin Gaye Sr.'s mental state became a key point of investigation. At 70 years old, he appeared detached, showing little remorse during initial questioning. This raised questions about his psychological stability. Was he suffering from cognitive decline, or had years of suppressed rage culminated in this irreversible act? Legal proceedings. The case moved swiftly through the legal system. Marvin Gaye Sr. was charged with voluntary manslaughter rather than murder, a decision influenced by his age, health, and the tumultuous relationship dynamics presented in court. His plea of no contest led to a suspended 6-year sentence, 5 years of probation, and ultimately, no prison time. This outcome sparked controversy. How could a man who admitted to killing his son face such minimal legal consequences? Was this a failure of the justice system, or did it reflect the nuanced understanding of family dynamics and mental health at the time? Lingering questions. As the investigation concluded, not all questions were answered. Did Marvin Gaye Sr. act purely in the heat of the moment, or were there deeper, premeditated motives? Was this an inevitable clash given their volatile history, or could intervention have prevented it? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all. In a society that often overlooks the silent battles within families, how many other tragedies lurk behind closed doors, waiting to unfold? The death of Marvin Gaye, the iconic Prince of Soul, left an indelible mark far beyond the immediate tragedy. This wasn't just the loss of a musical legend. It was the beginning of a legacy intertwined with grief, unanswered questions, and a family forever fractured. Marvin Gaye's death didn't just silence a voice. It amplified his music's message. In the aftermath, his albums surged in popularity, with What's Going On and Let's Get It On becoming even more symbolic of societal struggles and personal battles. But can a tragic death overshadow the art, or does it immortalize the artist? Marvin's name became synonymous with both soul-stirring music and the haunting story of a son killed by his father in California, USA. For the Gaye family, the loss was more than public headlines. It was an intimate, irreplaceable void. His mother, Alberta, devastated, struggled to reconcile the love she had for both her husband and her son. How do you grieve a child when the man you share a bed with is responsible for his death? Marvin Gaye III, his adopted son, carried the weight of a legacy tainted by violence, trying to preserve his father's memory while grappling with the family's dark history. The shockwaves extended beyond the family. Friends, collaborators, and millions of fans worldwide felt a collective mourning. Celebrities like Smokey Robinson and Diana Ross publicly expressed their heartbreak, their words filled with both admiration and disbelief. In Detroit, Michigan, where Marvin's musical journey began with Motown, fans held vigils, questioning how such a bright light could be extinguished so brutally. Marvin Gaye's death forced uncomfortable conversations about domestic violence, mental health, and the complex layers of family dynamics. How could a father, a pastor no less, commit such an act? It sparked debates on forgiveness, with some questioning if Marvin Gaye Sr.'s sentence, suspended after a plea deal, was justice served or denied. In Los Angeles, California, where the crime occurred, these discussions lingered long after the courtroom doors closed. The emotional scars weren't confined to the Gaye household. They rippled through communities, reflecting a universal pain. Music became both a balm and a reminder. Every lyric Marvin sang carried new weight, every melody tinged with the knowledge of his tragic end. Can we separate the art from the artist, or does knowing the story behind the song change how we hear it? Marvin Gaye's story didn't end with his death. His influence lived on in artists across generations, from Prince to John Legend. But his legacy is a dual narrative, one of musical genius and familial tragedy. In remembering Marvin, we are reminded not just of his talent, but of the fragile, flawed humanity behind the music. As we reflect on Marvin Gaye's life and death, we confront uncomfortable truths about fame, family, and forgiveness. Los Angeles, California, became the final chapter of his story, but the echoes of his voice, his pain, and his brilliance continue to resonate globally. His legacy, marked by both beauty and tragedy, remains unforgettable.